Somewhere to Belong by Haley Haggerty. Part of the Pride and Prejudice anthology, organized by C.E. Dorset. June 2021. It hadn't ever been a question of if I'd leave the castle. It had only been a question of when. Branches whipped at my face, digging into my arms as I tore through the forest. Not even the brambles and thorns wanted me to run. Soft moss squelched beneath my feet, threatening me to pull me down to the cool ground. I ignored it all, focusing only on my panicked breathing and ramped-up heartbeat. Strange birds called and yelled as I ran through the underbrush, the night sky dizzyingly high above me. I stole a quick glance upward, fast as I could. Not even the stars were out tonight, covered up by dark, dark clouds. "Up ahead! Get her!" I whirled around, tree branches tugging at my skirts. They wanted me to stay here, wanted me to get caught and have to face what I'd done, how I'd messed up so brutally. When I closed my eyes, I could still see the blood on my hands. I couldn't let them get me. Not again. The bushes rustled, and the soldiers burst through. Their armor shone brightly even in the darkening sky, taunting me, reminding me of my failure. Shame bubbled up in my throat, freezing me in my tracks, not letting me move even when they leveled their weapons towards me. Then the wind picked up and my head cleared. I couldn't let this happen. Not again. Not for her. I turned and ran, ducking between trees and weaving a zigzag pattern wildly. Maybe I was doing it so I wouldn't get caught, or maybe I just didn't have an idea of where to go. Both could be so painfully true. My heart thudded in time with my feet as I pounded against the ground, tearing through the grass as more and more mist surrounded me and made it even harder for me to see. Then suddenly, I saw it. The sea. Salt brushed its way into my senses before I even recognized the smell. The trees thinned and I burst out onto the edge of a steep cliff, the waves down below rising up and crashing against its rocks like thunderstorms. It was the fear of going over into that terrible push and pull that kept me from throwing myself off the edge. I couldn't let them win. I couldn't. But even if I didn't want to accept it, my bones knew this had to be the end. I sank to my knees, dust rising up around my skirts. I had nowhere else to run. So like the last time, I hadn't had a choice. My thoughts turned back to her. We'd grown up together and made friends long before anyone had thought to warn us it might be dangerous to fall in love with your servant. I remembered being 6 years old, lost in the throne room of the palace and distracted by all the hanging tapestries to know enough to get out of there before somebody caught me. The red and yellow shimmered in the light, scenes of dragons, knights, and princes large enough to hide in. Someone had giggled from behind a rainbow tapestry of a magical fairy sitting serenely at an altar, and I'd gone to look. She'd popped her red, curly-haired head from behind the fabric, smiling shyly. A golden crown sat nestled in between her curls, but I didn't think much of it then. "Who are you?" I remembered asking. "I'm the princess, of course," she'd said loftily, and that was it for both of us. From then on, we never went anywhere without each other, whether it was horseback riding, the princess's lessons, or even diplomatic missions. We were practically joined at the hip, and no one dared separate us, even as we grew older. I settled into the role of her lady-in-waiting, but neither of us bothered with titles much. Other courtiers decried me using the princess's proper name, but I couldn't help it when it felt so natural on my lips. Remembering it now burned in the back of my throat. Calliope. Calliope and Freya, that was us for as long as we were together. Over time, our friendship grew into something more that neither of us wanted to name at first, not wanting to spoil what we had. But it had been Calliope who'd first whispered to me in the dead of night, wondering if I thought the same about her. And it had been Calliope who'd first pressed her lips against mine, a sweet kiss that neither of us thought would cause so much pain and strife later on. We'd been so foolish, so giddy, so wrapped up in being in the other's arms that when it came all crumbling down with the help of some servant who'd walked in on us one fateful night, It hadn't even occurred to me that the king himself would banish me from the castle. But it had been me who'd pushed the servant out the highest tower window, and it had been me who watched him fall to his death without a single merciful thought. Calliope had cried, but the only thoughts I had were of us, finally able to run away free. "This is what we wanted," I said, unable to keep my voice down. "We can run, we can go anywhere we want now." "No," she'd whispered, shaking her head. "Not like this." I stared at her, both our eyes bright in the moonlight. I'd been ready to have my heart broken. I hadn't realized it would come so soon. I didn't resist when the king burst in, only having eyes for her. It was only when Calliope had pointed at me, protesting that I was the killer, that fear started to set in. "She's the one," she said, her frightened, panicked gaze and trembling voice still ingrained into my head. "She pushed him!" The guards had lunged for me, and I hadn't thought about what to do next. It was only when I found myself standing over two of their bodies, a bloodied sword held fast in my hand, that I'd realized what I'd done. I met Calliope's eyes. My name came out as a whisper from her. "Freya," she said, barely audible. "What have you done?" I'd ran, and I hadn't looked back. The mist cleared up ahead, and I was finally able to get a glimpse of the horizon. The sea started to sparkle, the ever-crashing waves receding along with the wind. How long had I been standing here thinking of everything I'd lost? I hugged my arms against my thin tunic, shivering in the brisk cold. After everything that happened, after everything I'd done, where could I go? I looked down, my eyes tracing the watery depths. The cliff stretched down for miles upon miles, plunging into the ocean with a fierceness that made my head start to pound. Could this be it? Could this be what I had to do to escape? "Freya." I turned, hope welling in the farthest reaches of my soul. Standing there, in the midst of all the wind and scattered rain, was her. Calliope's fine gown was tattered, soaked by the storm, but her eyes blazed as fiercely as the crown that rested in her curls. In one fluid moment, she tore it off and threw it to the ground. The crown bounced against a stone, rolling to a stop in the muddy ground. "What are you doing here?" I couldn't help how badly I wanted to know the answer. Calliope strode up to me, placing both hands on either side of my face as she stared into my eyes. "I'm ready," she said softly. Her voice shouldn't have been loud enough to carry over the wind, but it was. I felt it in every fiber of my being, every darkest part of my soul. I sucked in a deep breath, scanning her eyes for any hint of hesitation or fear. "Ready for what?" I asked. My voice trembled. It was the first sign that I felt scared at all. Calliope's eyes burned through the mist. "To run," she said, her voice growing. I felt a pressure on my hand and glanced down to see that she'd taken it in hers, rubbing her fingers over the backs of my bloody knuckles. A protest rose up from the back of my throat. "Your father, the guards, won't find us," she promised, and stepped away. I couldn't take my eyes off of her as she raised her arms into the sky, whistling twice. On cue, more kids than I could count stepped out from the shadows and leaves. I'd seen most of them around the castle. There was the butcher's boy, Gary, next to the apprentice blacksmith, Bartholomew, and even 2 or 3 courtiers beside them. Anne from the flower stall in town stepped up, her hand entwined with the stable girl, Yasmin. I blinked back the rain from my eyes, holding my breath as more and more people walked up from the forest, all meeting me and Calliope without any fear in any of their eyes. "What are they all doing here?" My question dropped from my mouth hoarsely. "We want to come with you," one of the courtiers addressed me. "We want to be free." But I shot a desperate glance to Calliope, practically begging her to take everyone back to the castle, where I knew they couldn't ever get hurt again, not by me or from what I'd done. "Calliope, you can't possibly think—" "They've all made their decision," she said, wrapping her hand around my arm. None of us will ever be safe in the kingdom again, Freya. Because of me. No! She turned to face me and I backed away, startled. Not because of you, don't you see? Because of what everyone else made us into. Because of how we were all forced to hide who we really are. But we can escape all of that, run away as fast as we can, find someplace where no one will ever force us to hide again. And if we don't? I asked, my voice welling up with trepidation. What then? Then we'll keep looking, she promised, and sweetly pressed her lips to mine. I inhaled the sticky sweetness of strawberries, of clove and other spices. She tasted exactly how she had on the first day when we'd first kissed. How could I possibly let anything happen to her now? Calliope pulled away, meeting my eyes with her sun-kissed gaze. The skies had cleared above us, the clouds parting to reveal a hazy blue sky. I took her hand in mine and looked over my shoulder to everyone else who was willing to put their lives on the line, all to be accepted. Follow me, I said hoarsely, daring to smile for the first time in weeks. We'll find somewhere to belong, I promise.